Hi everyone, Kyle and Keela here from Decise, and today we're going to talk about mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, better known as M&A. And M&A deals, I've been a part of three of them in my career, two divestitures and an acquisition. Keela, why don't you just start us off with your experience in this space?
Yeah, so I've helped stand up an M&A practice before. Been a part of a few transactions, a divestiture, a merger, an acquisition, and also have dealt with technology transfer in the entrepreneurial space.
Awesome. An M&A transaction is a sort of like equal parts extreme optimism and enthusiasm. It's like the break of a new day for a lot of organizations. And then at the same time, for the IT pros that have to pull it off, it's just like, oh no, how are we going to do this? You wrote an
Hmm.
article, and one of the quotes in there I loved was this, what I think is the sentiment of all IT pros when you hear about an initiative like an M&A transaction, which was there is no way we're going to be able to get this amount of work done in this amount of time.
Yes, that is something that I commonly hear. There's actually like two phrases I probably hear the most anytime an M&A is starting or is underway, which is there's no way we're going to be able to do this on time. Just not happening, and then you look at the leaders in that organization, they're like, "Oh, it's happening." This date is not moving. This transaction will occur on this date. And then the other thing is I just want to have my job when this is all over. Those are probably the phrases that you hear most with M&A. And the reason for that is the timelines are tight, the program it's complex, it's challenging, and the budgets are usually somewhat constrained. So it's difficult to deal with.
Most IT pros just absolutely resent the idea of getting handed a pretty vague scope, let's say like an ambitious scope where, okay, I know the outcome needs to look like this on this date. But when the IT pros are handed this sort of vague scope, but yet a firm deadline, like that, I think is the recipe for like pushback. Like, no, no way. I think it's a totally fair and common in the technology space to go before we commit to a date that we're going to ship. We need to have an understanding of what is the scope. We have to understand what our features are. We need to do QA. We have like our sort of methodology and routines that are wrapped around getting work to a certain degree of finality before we commit to a release date. But that's a common misconception, I think, with M&A transactions. They don't follow that pattern, do they?
They don't. It's just a luxury that M&As do not have. That date, your deadline date of whether it's a merger, an acquisition, or a separation divestiture date, that is set usually before the IT teams even know what's going to be going on. And so there's little give on what that is going to be, or even the scale and scope of what the work needs to be. And so it's one thing a lot of times, IT teams will say, let me just see the contract and we'll do what's in the contract. Well, the contract doesn't usually lay out how you're going to go about doing it. Sometimes it'll put some of the pricing in there, the types of information that will be shared and when, but very little of the how is laid out. And so a lot of times teams get stuck on the starting block on being able to get a program going. And the reason for that is they're waiting for the information. What are we going to do? How many users are there? How many apps? Where is the data? What systems? Um, all those types of questions are being asked, but that information is really difficult to get your hands on in the early days of an M&A. And the reason is there's different legal, processes that are in play. There's different restrictions, but also usually the organizations haven't stood up information sharing systems yet, or a way to be able to take the request and process it and send the information. It's just not there. And so a lot of times IT teams wait and try and obtain that information before they put together a strategy and a plan and get rolling. And then they're behind. And it puts even more pressure on trying to deliver within these fixed timelines. And so, one thing that we recommend is doing what we call a top down approach. And that's not like start with the CEO type of thing and work your way down. It's about information and setting a strategy and a plan. Don't wait for all of the information to be in your hands to be able to create a plan. Start with a strategy, start with a vision of where you want to go. Use past experience, use best practices, and you may have those within your organization because maybe you're an organization that does a lot of M&A, and so you kind of already have these playbooks. You've got people who've lived through these before, so you know what, roughly 60 to 80% of what you need to do. You already kind of have it there. Some organizations don't do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and so they may need to rely on a partner, who has supported organizations that are similar, in size or industry or type of transaction that's going on, to help them kind of figure it out. But just start with that strategy and that high level plan, and then start moving forward. There's some things that are pretty much a given in any type of merger and acquisition. Start doing those, but also be conscious of the fact that there is going to be some details that will come out over time. It may be months, it could even be years into the transaction where details will start to come out, and you're going to have to iterate on your plan and your strategy to work those things in. But that approach of taking a top down, a more iterative, agile approach allows you to get going and use all the time that you have as wisely as you can.
That's really good advice. I think for some organizations, like you said, they do a ton of M&A activity, and so they have these like just really well-oiled machines that can bring in a new company and kind of spit them out being integrated. But for the companies that it's pretty new or it's unique, or maybe they do one deal a year or they do one deal a decade, it sounds like some of what you're describing is your classic, like, well-disciplined program management office. Maybe it's cross-disciplinary, you've got risk management principles built into it. But is there anything else that, firms that just don't do this as a daily practice should consider when they're being faced with a pretty sizable M&A transaction?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, there's a couple things. Is yes, program management and having a firm, solid structure is very important. And I don't think that it's your typical program management structure. You have to have both strategy. You need to have experienced IT architects a part of it. You need to have your project managers and your program management skill set involved. That is very important. I think the other thing is a lot of times the scope isn't well defined. Yes, you're acquiring a company, you're separating off a piece of your business. That is generally understood. But to what degree and what all are you going to do isn't determined. And firming up what that scope is very important from day one. And a lot of times it comes down to transition and transformation. And a lot of times you have companies that are on one extreme or the other. And neither extreme is probably where most companies want to be. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And so, some companies see an M&A as like, yes, let's change everything. We haven't had budget in years. We're doing it all right now, and they get really excited and they try and do every upgrade. They've got their cloud move, they're switching to agile, this and that. They're trying to pack everything in because they finally have some budget, to be able to get some stuff done. But there's problems with that, in that, your overall goal is to make sure that you're ready to, accept the acquisition or to, separate, what is being divested on a date. And that date doesn't usually move. And so when you try and pack in a bunch of other stuff, you're putting that date at risk and your ability to deliver at risk. And so, you're packing too much in there. But the other thing is also everyone in the organization is going through change in an M&A. And then if you start layering on, and here's this new tool, and we're going to operate differently, here's this different process, it becomes too much for people to be able to absorb, and engage with. They just get exhausted and start to give up. So you can't overwhelm your company either. So that's one extreme that usually backfires. And the other one that backfires is when organizations are like, we're not changing a thing. We are just transitioning. Like for like, move it over, then we'll worry about making changes later. And yes, that is a safe play. And there are some times where that makes sense. But a lot of times, what ends up happening after the fact, the company, usually the IT organization, right, they met the deadlines, and maybe they were even early, right, because they kept their scope real tight and got it done on time. But a lot of times, the organization will actually look back at the IT team and say, did we miss an opportunity there? We spent all this time, we touched all these apps, we touched all this data, and we didn't improve it at all. we spent a lot of millions of dollars to do this, and we really didn't get a whole lot out of it, did we? And so that can also backfire some. And so what we recommend is somewhere right in the middle is, to take a look and say, essentially say, I've got a small amount that I can invest in transformational activities. I can't do it all, but I need to do a little bit. What initiatives should I invest in? What's going to give me my best return? And a lot of times that answer lies in, why is the transaction happening? Why is the acquisition, or why is that divestiture happening? Is it to get more customers, to get a bigger geography, to have, a bigger digital, footprint? Like, what is it? And then invest in the initiatives that are going to drive those goals the most forward.
I like that as I think about the way you described the transform versus transition paradigm there. I'm in the middle of preparing for a house move. And I think like transform to me is like you go into every single room and you empty every closet and you empty every drawer and you do that. Like if you know the Marie Kondo method for like, does this bring me joy? Like if I laid everything in my home and then went through that exercise of picking what do I want to keep. Like that's fantastic, right? But I'm actually never going to move. Like I'm just
No,
never
you're
going to
not.
complete it. And then on the other side, like the cutover of like for like, everything like for like is the equivalent of like bring the box into a room and everything that's in the room is in the box. You get to your new house and you are unpacking it. You're like, why in the world did I bring this with me? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that you sort of said, like the honest answer there is somewhere in the middle, right? Get rid of some of your stuff, move some of your old stuff. But it's like if you can keep your eye on the business outcome that you're out to achieve, I think you ideally can kind of pull from the best of both worlds without sacrificing like maybe employee morale or the gas in the tank, the sort of change tolerance that people have, and at the same time not saddling the new entity or the new organization with the burdens from the legacy environment of the old.
That's exactly it. And, that's the thing that I think a lot of organizations just really struggle with is figure this out before you get going. Yeah, a lot of times, either they're, companies are on the side of, I just can't get off the starting block because I don't have enough data, or, they've come to terms with the fact that they are doing this M&A activity. And then they're like, okay, let's go. Both feet in, let's just start running, but they haven't figured out what is important. What is my strategy? What is my plan? They haven't written it down, and they haven't communicated it with their teams. And so therefore, you end up with teams that are kind of all over the place, struggling to make the right day-to-day decisions. And then, companies who are, kind of here and there and everywhere on, are we transitioning? Are we transforming? Are we integrating these systems? Are we upgrading these systems? Are we just, moving everything in the room over? Or are we going to organize everything before we, deal with it? What are we going to do here? So taking the time, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but taking a little bit of time to line out that strategy and that plan before you get going can pay off big time in the long run.
Oh, that's really awesome. So let's pick it up next week. I think we'll talk a little bit more about the execution principles of how to successfully navigate and pull off an M&A transaction, as well as a focus on how to do it in a sustainable way to keep employee morale high and keep that healthy work environment. So for today, thank you, Keela. It was a great overview, a great start on the M&A topic. We'll pick it up again next week. For anybody else that wants to join us in the conversation, you can find us at deciseglobal.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.